You're listening to Tune Dig, a conversation between two lifelong friends about the power of music, one album at a time. I'm Cliff Seal.
And I'm Kyle Stapleton. Each episode, we talk about a single album in depth, unpacking it through conversation to understand what makes it worth appreciating and learning a little bit about life along the way.
If you're listening for the first time because we're covering an artist or a record you love, we promise you'll learn something new or gain a new perspective by the end of the episode.
And if you've stuck with us for multiple episodes, you know by now that you're bound to expand your horizons as we share clear entry points for artists you may never have tried to get into before.
Today we're talking about Three Ragas by Ravi Shankar.
This will be one of those fun ones where we get to anxiously tiptoe up to the precipice of trying to figure out how to talk about a thing that we figured out was very important, even though we thought it was important before. And then the more we learned about it, it became very important feeling. And now that precipice feels like it's 10 miles up, suspended in air, like that dude, astronaut guy from the Red Bull Phoenix thing, where he just was like, I'm in space, whoop, jumped out. It's a very long way down. Take a video of me. I think this is going to feel a lot like that, but I think what's awesome about this and me and you being friends and this podcast in general is a cool direction that we can take when we approach really complex music with a lot of history is just try to show up for it, be present, practice listening to it if we can, and otherwise just respect the fact that there's like a whole dense ball of stuff to be discovered if you push into pretty much anything we're going to talk about for however long this episode lasts.
Yeah, it took every bit of 51 episodes to be prepared with the philosophy that like the knowledge around this album or the relationship with this album doesn't end when we put our thoughts to record. It only begins in that moment. It has not yet begun until we think about it in a meaningful way. And so today is day one of my real relationship with Ravi Shankar, with Hindustani music, and with all the nearly myriad branches that come outward from it. My goal for today is to kunu my way through this thing. It's just to do less. The less you do, the more you do. I want to not try to surf, just surf. I want to skim over the top of the water with this one. I know the first thing that I'm doing after we get done with this season is I'm revisiting the book about Ravi that I started, and I'm so fascinated by. It's the first biography I've read in a while that I think I want to read multiple times. There's a great saying in the beginning of the book that the author said in the foreword. I came to realizing that capturing Ravi Shankar's entire life and music into one book is, to borrow David Shepard's verdict on Brian Eno, like folding a skyscraper into a suitcase. So let's pack light on this episode.
Well said already.
Wait. Jesus Christ, man. Where do you want to start?
I do think we can start. This will be fun. We can start with probably what we're not going to do, which will also give us a nice foreshadowing for, I think, the overall story of Three Ragas, which will touch lightly enough on to show all the different offshoots of it, basically. But if people, for the most part, are generically aware of Ravi, it is through the direct and dense impact on Western music in the 60s and creates a sort of view into where Ravi came from, the music before that, what all that looks like. But it sort of starts and ends with the American perspective on the impact of Indian music on rock music. And that is only one of a million valid perspectives. But we'll definitely talk about, frankly, some of the funny shit he said about meeting those people and playing music at those festivals, because some of it's hilarious. But what I think we can explore together in talking through this is how to approach this without a myopic Western mindset from the jump. It doesn't mean that this here Tune Dig episode is going to be the proper equivalent or proxy for an actual study of this human being, much less Indian classical music, Hindustani music, like the sitar in general, the concepts of Indian music, the theory of anything. We will only be able to tiptoe into each little rabbit hole anyway. But one thing we can try to do, I think, is what me and you have done in trying to approach this album like we do, the especially weird ones. Try to keep the most open mind you can, listen for things, use some different frameworks and approaches to draw out ideas. But otherwise, I think we're just going to be able to talk about the things that we learned to appreciate that we weren't otherwise prepared for, by just having a passing awareness of Robbie's impact in music, and how I think that shifts the more you sincerely push into what's actually happening with music that you don't understand well.
I think one of my initial impressions that really surprised me was how many cliches about Eastern music and what is described as, the phenomenon of Orientalism, like Eastern stereotypes, positive and negative, how much of that was imbued in my consciousness. And I didn't really realize it. And in studying the stuff that like he influenced in the West in that very specific time period in the 60s, it's like, oh, a lot of those cliches in media come from there. And some of it's kind of cool and a lot of it kind of cheapens it. But then like you can push too far in the opposite direction and revere it because it's so exotic and different too. So where I'd really like to land is just like a sense of mindfulness and appreciation for what it is, and that it is something really different. Like that book that we love that we've referenced over the years, that Every Noise Ever book, where you're just studying different dimensions of what makes music. There are volumes of quotes by a wide variety of people, our hero John Coltrane on down, who have seen something markedly different in the technical approach to music and the philosophy of why and how this music is made that is different from a lot of other cultures. But it has shades of lots of other cultural traditions and practices. But a lot of it is like more focused and disciplined and central to the culture of the country that it comes from. So there is a lot to appreciate and unpack. But I think like the first exercise is to be like, what do I know? What comes to mind when you think of the sitar, or of Ravi Shankar, if you have a familiarity, or of Eastern music or India, and just put all those thoughts out on the table and try to clear your head of all of them as a Westerner, and start with a child's perspective and curiosity. It's been really rewarding for me personally to do that. And so I would encourage you as a listener to do the same. And if you're listening, I'm making the assumption that like you love a lot of music. You probably have some passing familiarity with all this stuff. You are not deeply studied on it. Like if you're a deeply studied Hindustani expert or a musicologist, you're well past whatever this is that we're doing here, Cliff and me.
Yes, please send us your podcast.
Right. Yeah, your third eye is open and you've transcended past the need for a podcast. You simply transmit thoughts telepathically now. So please feel free to do that, or send us a handwritten letter with your thoughts and observations.
Yeah, and to drive that home or put a point on it, maybe when Kyle asks, what do you think of when you think of sitar? If you thought of the Beatles vaguely, that is okay. We're going to put that on the table together. But what we want you to know is that is a door that you now can walk through. And there is there are worlds on the other side of that touch point into what happened. And like, we will put that moment into perspective, but even that moment in kind of music history of the Beatles using this, even that sort of didn't play out the way we all think that it did, or the way that it ends up being told in retrospect, and really speaks to the complex relationship that Robbie's influence would then have with the music that he influenced, because it wasn't all intentional. And I think by us talking about the fundamental aspects of what's happening in this music enough to start to tune into it, it will better illuminate why it became so fascinating that there are real differences of opinion about not just how music is played, but how music is experienced and how music is positioned spiritually. Like, there is a very serious and heavy through line of some of the music that we'll talk about here. And I think what we can do best is approach that with an appropriate reverence. You don't have to believe in a religious fervor in order to understand the point that they are trying to make or what they are trying to do. And entering into that a little bit, in my opinion, is going to help illuminate Indian music in general, because the relationship to instruments, music, sound, participation, audiences, live performances, everything is fundamentally different than we have with it here. And that only really came to the surface after 10 or 15 years of his influence on popular music.
So stop me if you've heard this joke before. Ravi Shankar walks into Abbey Road Studios, November 7th, 1956, about 6 years before the Beatles ever do. Is there any backstory that you think is helpful to tell Ravi's story and sort of unpack his music and his influence?
Yep. So here's the first of the many rabbit holes that we're going to just stick toes into and purposefully try to walk over, because there's a lot to say even here alone. But I think probably the most important context for this moment is he is already a highly influential, well-known Indian musician by the time he's walking into the studio to record what would become his Western debut, Three Ragas, released in 1956, which he seems to have recorded and then released same year. But prior to this, he's not only got a massive influence, like to me, trying to explain this moment or this context brings Fela Kuti to mind. Like, this whole episode is going to be telling you that we're not telling you 99.99% of every interesting thing that possibly happened for this person just up until this point in time, much less the whole story of their life or narrative. So similarly, suffice it to say, through the preceding decade especially, he gained influence, became very well known for what he was doing, and was, truly known as a master who had from childhood been involved in Indian classical music. Though, if I recall correctly, he actually started off dancing to it with his brother as a family bit.
Yeah, and his brother and perhaps his father as well thought he would be a dancer. That would be the thing that he was known for. And while his family didn't have famous musicians in it, like, his dad had put on theater in London, and his brother was a super, super famous dancer. Ravi also danced, but he picked up the sitar like around the age of 10 or so and would accompany some and started doing his own thing. So definitely a wunderkind situation, but it seems like in the vein of Prince, he started really young, was rabidly curious. They paint a really beautiful picture in the book Indian Sun of the place where he grew up and how it fostered creativity and oneness with nature. Like, I don't want to over project, but I just couldn't help but get the sense over and over reading about him that there was, like, he was sort of divined to be in this role. Like, just the right combination of pieces of stardust came together for this being to grow into this figure that would take these musical ideas the world over and, like, sort of raise the vibrations of the world, because it's an extraordinarily tall task. But there's a paragraph in the beginning of the book that sort of condenses the whole almost Forrest Gumpy type story into a short thing. So I just want to read it real quick. Ravi also lived one of the 20th century's most extraordinary lives. He had an uncanny habit of being an eyewitness to historic events all around the world. He was born in India when the nation was struggling to evict the British, and India declared its independence from the British in 1947 after years of nonviolent protests by Gandhi and others. He was born in India when the nation was struggling to evict the British, toured Weimar Germany as a child star just as Hitler was rising to power, danced at Carnegie Hall and partied at the Cotton Club, met Clark Gable and Joan Crawford in Hollywood, sang for Gandhi, and was blessed by India's great poet Rabindranath Tagore, all before he was 18. Only then did he switch his focus from dance to music. He came to national recognition at the time of India's independence, toured the Soviet Union at the height of the Cold War, was invited to America in 1956 thanks to the CIA. Can't find enough details on that particular thing, but that's fascinating. And moved to California just in time for the Summer of Love. He shone a spotlight on Bangladesh's liberation struggle, played inside the Kremlin in the midst of a glasnost, and served as a member of India's parliament. So it's like hard to even conceptualize the extent of his influence, you know? And right around this time period, one thing that's really fascinating, and I think, you know, with Rihanna, we were trying to compare her to the Michael Jacksons and whatever. We're not saying a bunch of facts about Rihanna or Fela Kuti or somebody else to like, because some sort of linearity is going to make it more interesting. It's to like wrap your arms around the scale of a planet almost. So like in 1952, he became the director of music at All India Radio's home services division, like the national state radio, right as radio was exploding in the country. And he drove two big innovations with AIR. First, he created the National Program of Music, which was a 90-minute weekly show on Sunday evenings where one classical musician performed live. And it was like a huge springboard for a lot of musicians to become household names in India. And the second was the Vadya Vrinda, or the National Orchestra, which he curated the musicians for and boldly started including Western instruments like the violin and the clarinet when there's a pretty strict tradition of only using Indian Eastern instruments. I guess that's like if Taylor Swift was also the SVP of programming at iHeartMedia. Like that kind of has no equivalent now because there's not really a monoculture. But just think about the extent to which the art form was able to pervade, because he was not only a practitioner of the art form, but he was an entrepreneur he was always seeking to expand its influence. And you'll read time and again when you read about Ravi Shankar, he was taking time to try to explain the music. He would foreground every performance, especially in the West, with introductions about the forms of Hindustani music. You don't know about this yet, but your kids are going to love it, sort of thing. So it's really interesting that he was always really committed to like a bit of the showmanship, but also it really seemed like he wanted people to know it and love it like he did. And he took great pains to do that throughout his life.
Definitely. And we may touch on this some more as well, but even simply becoming a master of a musical instrument in Indian culture represented a tremendous amount of invested time and energy. And there are multiple layers to that as well that is sort of betrayed once again by our Western viewpoint on how people become virtuosic. Is that it? Hey, cool. Why not? Yes, our podcast, Virtuostic it is. But even now, right, like our sort of extremely modern experience of it is like Nandi type stuff. Like, oh, look at this child. And like, okay, the child has been able to consume so much information and start doing the task like repetitively on whatever instrument that they are like a natural at 5-6 years old about something, right? I watched, I think it was an 8 or 9-year-old do a backflip on their BMX bike in a concrete skate park on their first try today. Just like things just kind of like pop up to you on the internet now. And like mastery has sort of become a more dialed in and particular thing inside of our culture, I think, or at least our conceptualization of it. Whereas, again, this is a sweeping statement, but generally speaking, Hindustani music, Indian music, becoming good at that classical music not only required you being generally good at the instruments and memorizing a lot, which we'll talk about. The sitar alone is an instrument that you play while seated for hours. Like, I promise you that if you've never tried to sit in the same position for hours at a time, it is not easy, especially on the floor, especially with an instrument that you've got to play. And I think we'll hopefully reference this a couple of times, but there's a really great video from Emory University, actually, shout out local, that we found on YouTube that is just called Understanding the Basics of Indian Raga Music. And it's a very dense introduction to raga in general, but also sitar and some of the experiences of these performances. And one of the things that gets mentioned in there is that when you're learning sitar, you are literally sitting for 5 or 6 hours at a time as a session. Like that is what you're doing. So it's a little bit more back in the vein of the sort of classical children just like repeating tasks every day until they sort of spiritually connect with it or spiritually disconnect with it and move on to something different in their life. And just like clearly Ravi had a deep connection to whatever this thing was throughout his life. Starting in dance is not as unusual, again, as it might seem like from our perspective, because of how intertwined dance, vocals, and instruments are in this type of music at all. So when we say that, he's walking into Abbey Road in 1956, and prior to that had done a whole bunch of stuff that was just mentioned in that blurb that you read, like the density of that
25 years worth, like borderline a quarter century of experience in this field.
Yeah. And this is his first recorded record that the West could get. That's kind of why we're starting here. This is the best Ravi Shankar album for you to listen to. That's not really the perspective we're taking here. This exploded in terms of influence because it was the fastest he could get here in terms of recordings, and up until this point had been driven by performance so grand and popular that like his knowledge of his playing ability and performances were spreading throughout the world. Again, at a time before recorded music was just being sent around the world. So like this becomes this kind of nuclear moment where he has built up all this other stuff in a totally different part of the world and finally comes here, and only basically dorks know about him at this point, but the dorks are going nuts to be able to get his recording in, to be able to get down, which we'll talk some more about as well. Just 3 ragas this is highly improvisational music, but these aren't like songs that he wrote. Like that's another incorrect way to look at it. And so like thinking about this recording existing in 1956, and then we'll even mention just a smattering of all of the ways this particular record started changing the way that musicians thought about their own music, and started showing up in myriad ways throughout a lot of different places, but especially both jazz and classic rock. It's hard to express how much was happening in this moment for a simple mono recording of a handful of people performing Indian classical music effectively exercises.
Yeah. And condensed for Western audiences. I mean, really for the format of being pressed to wax. But to your point about the sitting down, like these performances in India would last 4, 5, 6 hours, sometimes much longer, depending on audience context. And I think one of the main things that we've learned is the like signal and receiver importance of context, and it's like sort of taken on much deeper meaning in studying this. So I know we'll talk more about that, but not only was this his first recording for an LP, and like LP is still a relatively new format, right? Like 78s were popular, like acetates and that sort of thing, mid 50s, but like long playing records of this length were still a relatively novel thing in the grand scheme of things. So not only was it his first LP recording, it was the second Indian classical music outing ever for the LP format, period. The first being Ali Akbar's. So just, it's a little hard to parse that with how sort of omnipresent. If I say the word sitar, you can hear a sitar in your mind now, and you can visualize something almost certainly. So just how far we've come with the cultural transmission in a relatively short time in human history is like kind of mind-blowing to me.
Yep. So maybe before we press further into some of the pertinent details about 3 ragas, specifically sitar, and a few other things about the theory, which I think will help. Let's maybe talk about that first exercise. For folks listening, we, in this new lowercase s season of Tune Dig, one of the things that we're doing is being really intentional about helping you approach music in really specific ways so that it is not feeling intimidating or like it's something you're not clicking with or something. Like, there are several different ways you can approach it and get things back out of it depending on your posture and your way of dealing with music. One of the ways that we do that, I think, is actually a good place to start and reflect on before we then talk about like what happens when you start to understand more about what's actually happening in the music. So starting with that, one of the questions we ask, and Kyle, I'd love to hear from you, like, what surprised you when you first started listening to this record? Like, what stands out when you're not trying to figure out what should stand out?
Familiarity and time, I would say, are the two things. I've been listening to ragas for a long, long time, just because I have a childlike fascination with the sounds of the sitar and the tempura. But like now, 51 Tune Digs later, like nearly every musical theme or idea that I've ever liked, or any way that I've had my mind expanded by thinking for a long time about it on this podcast, lives in some way in these recordings. I made connections to Erykah Badu and to Can and to Chelsea Wolfe and to Mono. And I was just thinking in like Björk and Queens of the Stone Age. And I was thinking about every one little nugget that has preoccupied me as we've gotten into a conversation. Those ideas washed over me in waves as I listened and like sort of contemplated the whole of the musical universe, because it is at once so technically complex and like he's a real good picker, you know, like you listen and you're like, damn, this dude's shredding. But also on the whole, it sort of clears your mind. Like it can be a little bit of a mind eraser if you let it. So it's real easy to get present with it. So I just, the influence on so many other things directly or indirectly was very clear. So I'm very thankful to you and your introduction to the band Sun to me for like teaching me how to even sustain my focus over greater increments of time, to be able to think bigger thoughts and walk through bigger webs with it. But the influence was clear and sort of a like, aha, you know, sitting outside, taking a breath of fresh air type of clear. So running it through the prism of music that I already like and appreciate, there was a lot to love. And then with time, the first track, the A side of the record, Raga Yog, I'm sorry that I'm not going to be able to pronounce any of the 3 ragas appropriately. It's 28 minutes. And like you said,
Yep,
it's a
short
prog
track. Yep.
Yeah. But that it's a half hour and it passes faster and faster with each listen. You know, you prime for some of the like first minute sounds. And also like Fela, I remember you mentioning the dun 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 Water No Good Enemy, and how it was like a primer. I mean, the start of Raga Jog is like a little bit of a bell to be like, oh, we're back around in the cycles, and it just happens faster and faster, but in a good way, not in a like time keeps on slipping, in a like I'm more in control of time when I listen to these recordings. And I think part of that comes from Raga Jog starting on such a like lively, almost bluesy note. And like we can talk about why it reads as bluesy, but also I can like see the Coltrane inspiration in that one in particular, because Ravi like goes to climb the mountain a couple of times. And when you get past the 20-minute mark in that, he just does some, what I think is objectively cool shit. There's a halftime moment with the tablas. The sort of uneven rhythm around that passage at The 21-minute mark reminds me of Dope Smoker by Sleep and how it felt like walking on,
Yeah.
on the sand. And then about a minute later, there's some really cool feels like up picking on a guitar, like punky plucks, like descending note plucks, and it just gives it some cool oomph. It's like where I have always thought of this music as sort of like mystical and peaceful and, you know, had those sort of stereotypical attributions. Like this shit's got some attitude, man. You know, it's got a little bit of a posture to it, which is cool. So I just noticed lots of different dimensions immediately, but it's a huge space to get up and walk around in. And like, you know, like Björk said, it's a massive emotional landscape.
Yeah, that last 10 minutes of the first track really builds to the degree that around, I think, 26 and a half minutes in, like if you dropped directly into that track by then, you'd think it was electronic loops. Like he starts playing so fast and all of the resonant and sympathetic strings are going so quickly and the harmonics are so tight with however he's playing it. I mean, it for real is starting to sound like a computer. And this is a legitimately just live ass recording of someone playing the sitar, like straight through, you know, for this whole session. So the way that dynamics appear, if you can hang on long enough to wait for the dynamics to get noticeable, it'll really surprise you and kind of blow you away. But yeah, there's a whole arc to that half-hour long track for sure.
And you mentioned before this, like speaking of dynamics, percussion, where that's a thing so often in Western music that we love, percussion and rhythm, it's like not there for long swaths of this. And for me, as a drum lover, it's so sparse that like I started listening for the drop. And I guess we're gonna use some electronic music terminology. It doesn't appear in the first raga until 13 minutes in. And then when it does, it's very like it announces itself. So it's very interesting that the players allow each other to speak for long periods of time before they join the conversation or move the conversation forward.
There are a lot of aspects that are analogous in our Western understanding to jazz, which I think is both unintentional and then, you know, maybe there's some intentional influence points. But yeah, to that end, like they are not worried about letting another player take a lead for a long period of time. There is no rush to finish up 12 bars or anything like that. And there's really no concept of that. And yeah, I was surprised how often I would go, wait, when did the drums drop back out though? Like, wait, when did that happen? And like, I kept noticing that it would just kind of shuffle in and out in a way that is not representative of our general relationship to rhythm in Western music, where it's like punctuated almost literally. Whereas here, this is much more complementary and the rhythm is internal to what's being done and has a lot more to do with drone than it does BPM, which is fascinating. I do think even on a blind first listen through, so to speak, I think it's entertaining for anyone who's listened to any broad spectrum of music because you get that full range of little 30-second vignettes of, oh, that sounds like something else. Oh, I've heard that before. Oh, I know that feel. And like, to your point, you can bring sitar to mind immediately. And it's not that you're thinking of, but yet you're sitting there hearing the sitar play for long enough that you can catch these little moments of like, oh, that actually sounds like a thing that you would then realize was made 15 years later on a guitar by somebody who it turns out was very interested in this record. And it's like, okay, I've seen a little bit more of The Matrix today. Like I'm understanding a little bit more of what's happening, and all at once, and maybe this is me, but all at once it sort of starts to make you happy and sad Like, I'm happy to feel the connection between musical cultures and influence and learning from one another and the things that make the blues great, right? The theft that is moral and appropriate of iterating on each other's music and learning from one another. And yet, on the other hand, there is this kind of immediate sinking feeling of like, boy, I bet we didn't do that right, though. I bet we didn't totally handle that with the best taste we could have. And all those things end up being true on further investigation. But yeah, there's something deep that you can connect with, I think, pretty quickly because you start to realize how much is going on here that you weren't aware of before.
How would you recommend people contextualize this record? When, where, how, why do you put it on?
I think this one would be fun to experiment with because it's going to be mildly inaccessible for some people. And in that sense, when you're experiencing that, I think there are a couple of basically opposites to try. I love to recommend music that I think actually works for meditation. I think this is one that can. I would also fully understand if a familiarity or lack of familiarity with this music would instead be distracting, and that would be difficult. In that case, I'd try an even more passive way of listening to it. I don't think there's anything disrespectful to putting Ravi on in the background while you like make breakfast or some shit. The more that I put this music on in a bunch of different contexts through every speaker and set of headphones and whatever that I owned, the more it no longer felt odd to be listening to it anytime I wanted to. And it started to click in differently in a way that I think other people should experiment with.
And you say meditation, and that probably brings one particular image to mind, you know, the sitting on the floor cross-legged with your eyes closed. But this type of music, good, bad, or otherwise, I think is associated with the practice of trying to achieve greater mindfulness for a reason. Like the way this music spreads itself out and sustains drones around an anchor point lends itself to the same sort of practice with your mind. So I think it is good for both aimless thinking. Like you can leave it at a low volume to minimize the distracting bit. It's better than the air quote silence of the room. Or in a very disciplined fashion, trying to hold your focus on a thing longer, in particular your breath to start. Like I think it's a great record, an entry point for breath work, to just work with the flow of the record to keep yourself focused on your breathing and become more circular with it. My favorite meditation, because I can't sit still, is a long walk. And it accompanies a walk in nature so beautifully. And I know it cheapens nature a little to bring AirPods or human vibrations or whatever. But I think this is about as good as it gets for the man-made stuff, for just going and noticing and achieving greater mindfulness by thinking about birds, thinking about the way the air smells, looking at the different greens of the trees, and just finding more of your place in the world. So meditation, in whatever form that may look like for you, becoming more mindful of who you are and your body in this place in space and time. The other thing that I think is interesting contextually is like, if you want to play an instrument, or you like to play, or you just want to like think about music, like you like music theory stuff, but you don't really know. Hindustani is a world unto itself. It's got a lot of terminology that gives it kind of a high barrier to entry for Westerners like me. But there are very smart people who are finding ways to use the vocabulary of this music to like make playing and thinking about playing more interesting. I know, like, I love and have sent you a number of Matt Sweeney's Guitar Moves series. And one of my favorite ones is Blake Mills and how he has learned. He's taken the best of what he does on guitar, but he really likes the sound of the sitar, and he's found unique ways to try to emulate the like unique setup of the instrument relative to a 6-string guitar. This album, this music is very instrument forward. You know, like these people pick these instruments, and these instruments seem to kind of pick them too. And they each have a role in the playing. And so just like thinking about instruments, if you just sort of want to geek on that, the same way that you would do with saxophone, maybe, and think about, Coltrane versus Jerry Rafferty versus whatever. There is just whatever context makes you think about the music itself on the train or whatever. This is a fun thing to do, to just think about music, because it is probably so different than a great deal of what you listen to, even if it is stuff like jazz or stuff that's very akin to or influenced by this.
Hell yeah. Dude, let's use that as the rocket ship. Okay, let's then talk about at a kind of high level what Indian classical music, ragas, sitar, a couple other instruments, like let's just hit some points on that to give a quick kind of intro to what's happening so that you can focus on it. Because I do think, first of all, I think we're in total agreement. If you stopped listening to us right here and you knew nothing else about this record or Ravi or anything, you can get a lot out of this record for the rest of your life. You don't need to think anything further about it in order to get more out of it, because something important is happening in it and you will attune to it if you're interested in listening to it. Like something is being done here that has connected and enlivened musicians across the world. Like it will catch you too if you just listen to it and let it bring you things. So that's cool. I do think though, if you're interested in like, okay, I want to listen to this instrument like you're suggesting, Kyle, I want to follow it. What am I following when I'm trying to follow one of these instruments? Because their whole approach to the way that they sound is fundamentally different than Western instruments for the most part. And secondly, their musical and theoretical approach is analogous to ours. I don't think it's either better or worse, but it is different enough with enough nuance to where if you want to understand what is happening, you have to know just a little bit more about what is different about it. And I think, hopefully you feel the same, but not that much time and energy was invested in order to understand enough to start, for instance, getting what a sitar sounds like and why. And I think that can be helpful to folks. Sound good to you?
Yeah. Yes to the physical instruments part. I talk all the time to my wife about, we stumbled on a How Stuff Works episode, or how it's made, about the building of a pedal steel. And that thing is such a beautiful and intricate work of human mastery and craft. I think about that shit like once a week. I'm not
That's your Roman Empire.
It's pedal steel is 100% my Roman Empire. But the sitar is like very similar in it's not as complex as a pedal steel, I would say, but I'd say they're like cousins in a lot of ways. So I think, yes, the instruments themselves, but also to your point about the philosophy and theory, there are things that just like hadn't even occurred to me about how to produce or consume music in some of the ways that they think about, like some of the traditions, especially. In particular, I'm thinking like certain ragas are intended to be played at certain times of day or for certain purposes, like waking or ending the day. And that is a recognized thing about a raga generally. And that's like Legend of Zelda-y to me. Like you play the ocarina and it does a different thing during the day than it does at night. And I don't mean that flippantly. I mean like that sparks such a deep sense of wonder in me that it's like, well, yeah, I mean, of course you could play, some playlists are better for morning or lunchtime drive or nighttime party or whatever, but like specific things being devoted to specific purposes, it's like gives me a thrill.
It makes you feel like it's possible that people once actually felt the way about music that me and you do on a normal basis. Like, wait a minute, there was a culturally embedded thing that lasted for generations and persists to this day, where musical exercises and refrains are understood to represent feelings and times of day. That's the thing.
I mean, I feel like a psycho most of the time when I say like music guides my daily life. Like everything I know about how to be a decent human, I've learned from music. Like,
Yep.
that's here. That's all here and normalized. And so I guess you're right. It does give me a comfort in that way.
It's nice to find the silver lining. You only have to look across history to find some.
And the literal planet.
So I think a few quick hits on what is distinct about Indian classical music in general from a common Western understanding of music that I think will get folks a good portion of the way there. And as always, this is another branching off point. If you want to learn more, go learn more. This is the introduction, my friend. Okay. But it's cool to there's a depth of understanding. I know we've said it, but there's a depth of understanding about this record that comes from understanding what is being done inside or what is shaping the improvisation that's happening. Because it's both highly improvisational and highly structured all at one time. And it's a very different framework than we usually use. So first, ragas in general are like a generic thing inside of the music. Like 3 ragas is a literal, it's 3 of them, it's these, which are that's a classical grouping of them, but ragas are a thing in and of their own. And they're basically like melodic frameworks or scales that sort of fill out the foundation of how Indian classical music works. But they differ from a traditional scale or in guitars like modes and things like that. They differ from that in a number of ways. But one of them is they have unique sets of ascending and descending notes. They often have specific repeated melodic patterns. So it's not just finding all the notes in a scale in a given octave. It's particular patterns that get repeated as part of a practice. And then those things that we just talked about, those are the things that are associated with moods and emotions and times of day. So that's a whole thing that we're not really used to thinking about at all, that starts to unlock a little bit more of it. So and I know that this won't describe it the right way, but it's a bit like a combination of scales on an instrument with rudiments on a drum, where you're practicing a set of basically drills that are not only good for anybody and can be played at different tempos or different levels of difficulty, but on top of it, they are rudiments are a generic thing that often come in common groupings that drummers or percussionists are just generally aware of and can often just start playing together because they understand enough about it. So it's similar to that as well, in the sense that it's like a cultural thing inside of particular instruments or particular music. So ragas are that framework, scale, rudiment type thing that sits inside of, or sort of an output of, the larger Indian classical music, which has 7 basic notes with 5 interspersed half notes. So they have a 12-note scale as well. I could literally do a dorky podcast about this particular aspect of it, but I will not. The decisions about how musical frequencies, like how a note sounds, like what frequency a note is at, has generally been a historically cultural decision about the functionality of performing music. Generally speaking, the way that we tune instruments in the West especially stems from our desire to be able to play in multiple keys inside of the same performance. And so we can't tune the instruments to a particular key if we want to be able to play different keys. So we actually have a different mathematical system for how our notes work.
This is your Roman Empire a little bit.
Buddy.
I'm now realizing.
Yes.
I remember that time you gave the history of metal talk and you talked about the tritone for a hot minute.
Yes.
So this is that.
Why your great-great-great-grandparents thought the tritone was evil and would bring Satan to the fore. Yeah.
Number 3 may shock you.
And it's that they were dumb. Sorry. So yes, in the Western form of it, our 12-note scale is effectively like a ratio system, so that no matter what key you're playing in, the notes are equal distances apart from one another, so that it sounds approximately right. But the little fun takeaway from this moment is like effectively like Western music, like the notes are not on pitch pretty much ever. They're not on actual pitch for what we're thinking that they're supposed to be. So differently from that is the idea that you're tuning instruments directly to a particular key. That is what is happening in Indian classical music and in a lot of other music with other forms of instruments from the past. But that is important because that means not only is a particular key being chosen, but the key is not anchored to, you've probably heard of 440 hertz before, which is the way that we center our tuning. So like that's not a thing either. So the key is sort of a relative thing. The root of said key could also be decided. The space between the notes in the scale could also potentially change, which is not a thing that we do. There's a ton more to it for sure. But I think just that kind of basic understanding of like the shape you're looking at geometrically looks similar enough if you step back from it. But if you get really close and sort of look inside of it, it's a very different kind of network of how things connect to one another. And so hopefully that is honest to God, my best fucking pitch for that's why you should listen to these people playing a musical scale for an hour. Because there's like so much inside of it, and their relationship to these musical frameworks and scales are themselves that these provide a framework for improvisation, which is most of what we're hearing inside of this record to begin with. How did I do?
You just touched on something. Great. You pass. No firing squad for you today. You made me realize just now that not only do I like to listen to, I guess, the fretwork for an hour and thinking about the music itself and like, why does it sound different than other things? But also I like hearing people talk about this music and this sort of approach, you know, like I could do that for as long as I could listen to it. And I say that as someone who hates having it explained to me. In the Frank Ocean episode, I know I've referenced this before. You use the like turning the lights on in Space Mountain thing. Like that's my ick, bro. So we have my Roman Empire and my ick documented in the Ravi Shankar episode. But like with this, it's so fascinating and it's so bountiful. And it goes right up to the present moment where there are scores of Westerners obsessed with King Gizzard and their commitment to intertonality and microtonality. And like, who am I to talk about that shit? I don't play the guitar. But it's really fascinating to me that they've like gone out and made custom instruments in order to be able to do this thing. But it comes from like, if you look at a map, you do a heat map from the Indian subcontinent on down southeast to the Aboriginal people of Australia and New Zealand on up to the practitioners in Japan. There's that thing in what would broadly be regarded as Eastern music with stuff like microtonality and the fact that they have specific ascent and descent sequences. Like they have moves relative to all this stuff is fascinating. It's just, even if you're like me and you don't know how to apply that science for a really long time, it just starts to color the way you think about all the music that you're listening to and what is or isn't happening in it relative to this new knowledge that you are now wearing like a cloak, you know?
100%. So I think one more appropriate adornment to said cloak is a quick explanation of the instruments that are being used here. To that end, again, we will once again verbalize. We are going to briefly say a thing that otherwise, with the removal of constraints, I would manically talk about for hours. So just know that is what is going through my heart, mind, and body at this moment in time. However, specifically, the sitar is, once you start to like understand what is happening on that instrument, the sound of it speaks to you differently.
Yeah. It's a thing of beauty. Like it is truly a marvel of human invention.
Yeah. I think there's a key detail in here. And before I kind of describe all these instruments, I think one note that was helpful that I learned in this process was, for the most part, Hindustani classical music is vocal centric. And so a lot of the musical forms, and therefore how the instruments are played and how they sound, are themselves vocal centric. And I think that starts to draw out interesting characteristics of why particular instruments get chosen and how they get played. But I think that is a bit of why I think you can hear the influence of that vocal centricity in how sitar is played at all. So I think bringing that into the moment helps you hear a little bit of how it's being used and what the like tradition of it is. But specifically, okay, so just let's base folks on something that they probably know, right? Standard Americanish guitar as we know it now, or Western guitar, 6 strings, that can flex down to 4. It's a bass guitar, flexes up to 7, 8 strings or more if you're a metal influencer on TikTok. So, but generally speaking, that's the like centricity of our strings, and those are tuned to
single digits.
Yeah, those are tuned to, generally speaking, a common set of like note patterns, like standard tuning, drop tuning, open tuning, whatever. We have a handful of these types of things, but again, generally speaking, somewhere between 4 and 8 strings. So sitar is 18 to 21 strings. And 6 to 7 of those strings are played, and the other ones are for resonance. And like, this is a moment for sure where it's like, if you already know this, is going to be like, okay, thanks for saying it really slowly. I get it. But if you've never heard this before, like, I think this is killer, because this is like, I know I've heard this story from other people before, but this is the type of thing you do get when you go to music school, even for a bit. If you've ever had a music teacher that wants to teach you about resonance, one of the little fun tricks that they do is, in a certain type of piano, you can like yell into the piano and press the sustain pedal, and your voice will be reflected through the reverberations of the piano hammer string thingies. No, they're not strings. I don't know how to describe any of that. What is happening on the inside of the piano starts to reverberate with the tonality of the like what you put in it through your voice. And you start to get this understanding of like, okay, instruments work in a particular way. Like a guitar is not just I'm playing a string and string makes this note. It is you are playing a string which vibrates at a particular frequency, which resonates inside the body of the guitar, which gets picked up by the pickup and transmitted outwards. So like the body, the instrument, the shape, everything that's happening on your instrument that we can just kind of take for granted because you just pull it up and start playing a fucking John Denver song or whatever, is like, that betrays the complexity of what can happen in an instrument. And a sitar takes you all the way to the other side of it, to the degree that most of the strings on this instrument are now not things you're controlling, but are simply responding to what you're playing and how you're playing it. And based on how you've tuned them in advance, they will respond in a specific way to what you play and how you play it. So there's like playing and meta playing. And then there's the stuff that happens that you may or may not be able to expect in the meantime, that's just going to come up as a result of how you decide to do stuff. That's wild. You're smiling at me like I just successfully manically talked about a sitar for like 5 minutes.
It's so extra as an instrument.
Yeah.
You're forced to reckon with the miracle of music. Like it really manifest what a miracle it is that we can like harness the lightning and we have real process around it. It's like a factory for the sublime, a little, not the band Sublime, for the sublime, the things in the universe. Yeah, it makes you a little manic because it just like, it fills you with the Holy Spirit, so to speak. And I don't know, a sitar or pedal steel is like about as perfect cup of coffee as you can get in this world when it comes to instruments.
Yeah, and I think just knowing that generally about sitar and how we talked about it, and then the fact that there's like strings that are designed to resonate will, if you're curious, help you notice things differently in instruments that you're used to. Like banjos can have sympathetic strings. That's probably why you've heard a banjo sound that reminds you of sitar. There are these little things you start to learn, and it's like, okay, so we're all just in a big soup together, learning from one another. And every now and then an instrument comes along like this. It's like, oh, that sounds crazy. And like but it's the good crazy. It's the kind of crazy that makes every Western musician in the 60s, as we'll talk about, go absolutely bananas and be like, I'm already bored with guitar because I just heard this thing. And now I need for my guitar to sound like this thing that has 10 times the amount of strings and complexity to it. There's something really cool about that instrument. And it's then backed by some simpler instruments. Okay. The tabla is hand drums. That's not to oversimplify the playing of it, on which there is very incredible musicianship on this record. So not downplaying it at all. Just that particular instrument is a bit more straightforward. There's definitely cultural depth to it, but we've already talked about probably the most interesting aspect of that instrument here is how judiciously it is used compared to how we're used to rhythmic instruments. And then tambura is, visually speaking, something that we might think of more like a bass guitar, in the sense that it's going to play longer, steadier notes that are perhaps more aligned with rhythm. But specifically in this type of music, like it's doing something particular, and it's intended to have a droning effect, not provide a rhythmic basis for the melody that's being played. And I think you can hear that both in the intention of how it's played, but then like this instrument itself has far less strings. I think we're just looking at 4 at this point. Yeah, tuned to specific notes within that scale that's chosen, but it's creating ambiance. It's your, musical Nag Champa, which gives me quite a bit of respect for someone who's playing it, because like that's a real vibe. You're connected to a frequency playing this instrument for ragas that are lasting half an hour. Like that's something different.
Yeah. Setting the room tone for 5 hours, 6 hours, but knowing that you're putting the vibe, you were quite literally putting the vibration into the space for the whole time. You are the basis of the thing, which has a bit of a Western equivalent in the bass, like sort of bringing the rhythm to drive the more narrative action forward. But I would be remiss if I didn't shout out like the ZZ Top of this particular set of recordings. 3 men who make, as my dad would say, make a lot of racket for just 3 fellas. So Ravi obviously playing the sitar, Chatur Lal playing the tabla, and in his short life was a player of some renown on the instrument, and sort of in some ways did for tabla what Ravi did for sitar. He was a prominent, influential player, and Pradyut Sen on the tambura. So thank you, gentlemen, for your cosmic contributions.
Yes, indeed. So I thought also like we could touch really quickly on and I don't want to overthink this, but the sort of underlying meaning or associated concepts with the 3 ragas really quickly. And then we can talk about our second exercise that we recommend, which is like, the first one we discussed was sort of how does it hit you when you're not thinking about it too hard. But now we're talking about, okay, you've learned a thing or two. What are some things you can kind of focus and isolate on? So let's hit that, and then we can definitely talk about the way that this played out culturally from here and ramp people up to learning more if they want. So Ragajog, however it is that we want to accidentally mispronounce it, we're doing our best. But so like we mentioned, they're like associated culturally with times of day and moods and stuff. So this one is an evening raga that expresses the yearning of a longing soul. In like, I just want to put a point on what I just said, which that was a quote from somebody else about the actual meaning of this kind of culturally and as word. But like, okay, we have built up to this point that what is being played in a raga is effectively like a musical framework or a scale or whatever that is creating a foundation for further improvisation, but the improvisation is within the raga itself. So like this thing that we just described, which is based in a very specific framework, is itself for the evening. Try to accept that as a truth without putting it through the filter of like, does it make sense to me that this thing could be represented by the evening or by the yearning of a longing soul? Like, just, I don't know. I hope you can just like swallow that. Each, like, especially the first two have a particular meaning. The third one is a little bit more of like a musical exercise. But like, if you can just sort of say, okay, I believe that, I think it helps you to frame up the next time you listen to it.
Yeah. And, I don't want to assign too much undue symbolism, but knowing that this was the sort of recorded introduction to Western audiences for Ravi and for this type of music, knowing that it's typically played in the late evening, 9 p.m. to midnight. There's a great quote from that same source, Arun Singh, talking about this raga, saying, Jog integrates the Atman, the soul, with the Paramatman, or divine reality, unifying the previous day to the coming day. So it's about like transitions or linkages or thresholds. A person can take in this divine cosmic power before morning to remain full of life during the day. So starting with a bit of a transition, but also introducing the West to the East with placing them at a threshold musically in this type of music, and also introducing some things that might be fairly familiar to their ears or their sensibilities, in that it has some pentatonic to it. That same source also mentions it omits the second and sixth intervals, making it pentatonic in nature. So, there's a bit of nighttime is the right time, evening blues, which was a hugely popular thing by this time in the US and the UK.
I'm glad you mentioned that about the pentatonic bit. I don't have more to say about it other than just like, if something in your dorky musical nature has come alive listening to us try to poorly explain some of these concepts, what Kyle just mentioned is one of a million little journeys for your escape pod into space. Like, the fact that this is a pentatonic scale that is alike but different from our scale introduces the thing that makes you feel or think of blues while you're listening to it. And like that, it's something about that is really cool when you lean into it, and it will help you not only hear this song differently, but then you will hear blues differently now too, which is really cool. So the second raga is this one's your morning deal. Your 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. I saw in at least one place the kind of literal translation of this one is morning devotional. Raga Ahir Bhairav. One example, it's hard to fact check a few of these things, so I'm going with the vibe of this feels directionally appropriate to repeat because I saw it somewhere. But this raga was fabled to mimic the ringing of cowbells at dawn. Like, this idea of like 6 to 9, that's the sun has come up, right? The transition that Kyle just mentioned, you had gone into night through midnight with the Raga Jog, and now you are trying to experience the feeling of it is morning. And I love the 6 to 9 a.m. range of it, because sometimes I would like to sleep in and still catch this energy. But like, thinking of it that way, again, gives you a new little lens on what you're listening to the next time you listen to it.
Also interesting for anyone subscribed to the calendar, it is the opening raga on the Call of the Valley record, which came out in 1968 and was like, in many ways, considered the first true Hindustani classic that sold super widely in the West. So 12 full years after this came out, but still very much in the same tradition. But if you look at the artwork for that record, it is literally pastoral. It is a field in the day. So take in Ravi and his crew's interpretation of it, and then go check out Call of the Valley for their take on it as well.
Right on. And then the final raga, so this final one, so far as I've been able to discern, is distinct from the other two in that it doesn't necessarily represent culturally or otherwise a very particular time of day or concept. But musically, there's a couple of things. This raga is belonging to the Southern Indian Carnatic tradition. So I think these ragas are combining multiple cultures over time from within similar geographic areas, but it's got some sort of functional equivalents in other musical expressions. So basically, what's happening in this final raga is equivalent or similar to a Hungarian minor scale. In Western music, I'm saying this with a sincere and straight face, we don't really use the word gypsy anymore. However, it is popularly known as a gypsy minor scale. So there are touch points and alignments with what's going on in this raga with other forms of music and other frameworks as well that's a little bit more directly aligned than some of the other ones are, which are a little bit more about a vibe and an association with music that comes from a different culture than we really have.
Also called Egyptian minor.
Much
affectionately
preferred.
So. Yeah, affectionately so by Miles Davis, who in his autobiography said it's something that he learned at Juilliard. So for the mega music nerds or aspiring music nerds familiar with the sort of notoriously complex composition Nardis that I think Miles himself never actually recorded, but he composed, and there are other people's versions of it out there. But like part of the canon for Miles heads and jazz heads, Nardis is also in this scale.
So that's our best. Here is what we think is the least amount of information you might need to know to go one level further into what you're actually listening to here. There would be other ways to summarize it, but this is our best approach, and people keep telling us that we're not too bad at it. So here we are trying again, because we really want you to get into this record if you can. Like, sincerely, for real. Once again, we want you to get into this music that you might not be used to, and we're going to do everything we can to try to get you there.
More in the spirit of we are getting into it. People who listen to a ton of music and have crossed many rivers musically and expanded in so many different directions, that this is exciting as two jaded music people. And we hope you sense that excitement and are excited as well.
Yeah, I did that thing that my body does automatically now, where if I start enjoying music to a certain degree, I unconsciously start just searching for artist name merch. So I'm just in Safari like Ravi Shankar merch. I'm like, hold on, God damn it. Never mind. Let's pull back. Yet another one for the pile of things that Kyle's going to need to make on the press that I get him to put in his basement.
I did manage to find a pretty cool Alice Coltrane shirt not too long ago that we were like, is this a cafe press bootleg? But it actually turned out pretty nice.
So in that spirit, so the second exercise that we mentioned, so when you want to go a little bit further and focus on something or isolate something, what stood out to you when you started to listen into things in particular, or I don't know, what surprised you once you started to isolate things?
Exactly what you said about the sitar. Anchor and fly away of the resonant notes and then the improv over and around it, and just seeing how that made me feel and how that was like, oh, the interaction between these two things I like in the same way that I like the Everly Brothers, like watching the way these two notes or sets of notes interact. But it was way wider than two people singing a note together in time and amount of vibration. So I thought that was really cool. Like you have said the word resonance a couple of times, and on a literal vibrational and on a spiritual level, the idea of resonance with each other and with time and space being like sort of the ultimate aim of music is the idea that I can't get out of my head as we think about this music. So I just like having a guiding word or a mantra of resonance as you go in, and like sort of visualizing the stuff dancing around each other is, you know, it's a little bit Xbox visualizer-y.
No, totally. No, that makes a ton of sense. We've talked about it, but I ended up thinking about really similar things too. This was one of those records that the more attention I tried to pay to the music, the more non-musical things started occurring to me, which is a weird, like, I don't know how to discern which records do that exactly, but this one does. And yeah, resonance was a thing because this will be fun to try to verbalize one of those little thoughts that you end up letting run rampant in your brain. But there's obviously inspiration and overlap with modern like drone. You already mentioned Sun up at the top, but like, you know, you don't have to be a genius to understand why drone would be influenced by this type of music to begin with. But when I think of like a Sun show in particular, or like a noise show, like they are playing with the relationship between dissonance and consonance, right? Like at a Sun show, your heart starts to ache because they're playing a dissonant chord really, really slow, and you know that the resolving chord is coming. And so they're like slowly playing with kind of bending in and out of what feels and seems right. And you begin to discern the waves. Like you start to hear the waves interacting with each other and go, whoa, 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 whoa. Like you start to hear something at a totally different level entirely. And it kind of started occurring to me like that in a sort of spiritual descendant type of way. Like that is the resonance of their instrumentation. Like the sitar is resonating what is being played, you know, melodically inside of a framework, but its interactions between itself and then the other instruments is doing a very particular thing that creates like a bunch of kind of meta cadences. Like you hear different rhythms, especially in the moments where there isn't a drum being played. And like similarly for a good drone band, so not just a bunch of doofuses on stage making noise and hoping that it sounds right, but those people that you've actually heard or seen where you're like, they're doing something and they understand what it is, even if I don't. That form of drone, like all of a sudden it felt like my little third eye opened up about the concept of resonance. And it was like, wait, the resonance of drone is the feedback between amplifiers pointed at one another that they're using to sort of resolve and create dissonance between them. But then if you push that even further, like, is electronic music's resonance the dancing people on the floor instead of it being the way that the music sounds? Because it's the thing that you are naturally creating as like an expected byproduct of the thing that you're doing in the music. And like, it's not like there's some sort of magically profound thing it brought me to. It's more like it started to tell me that there is a profound thing that I need to be more open to. And like, when you're just sitting there listening to a fucking record and your brain does that to you, like something else is happening. And like, it's worth digging into why music just made you do a thing like that. And not to go too hard on it, but to be honest with you, a thing that connected with that feeling to me was, we're going to go for it for a second. Sorry. I saw a quote from Ram Dass, who was talking about something obviously totally different. But he said, as you approach perfect truth, you meet the guru on deeper and deeper planes. And for whatever reason, that concept, that made me go, okay, the thing that caused people, which we'll talk about some more in a second, the thing that all of a sudden makes people come alive sometimes when they hear this music for the first time is they are meeting Ravi. They're meeting the guru of sitar at a plane that they can understand because you're willing to engage with it at that level. You're willing to like present yourself to the music and try to hear what's happening. And like, you are meeting someone who's not just good at sitar, but is spiritually connected to their instrument and the way that they perform and improvise music at all for people. Does that make sense?
Yeah. It actually, that and what you said about electronic music and dancers being part of the resonance brought up something that I'd memory hold from high school. In freshman year speech class, the basic building block of communication that you talk about on the first day or first week is that all communication and human connection is signal and receiver and noise in the middle. And good communication seeks to remove as much of the noise and create fidelity or resonance between speaker and recipient, right? Because we can never occupy the same brain as two discrete units of existence. So the best that we can do is try to put out a signal and hope that there is resonance and fidelity. And when we find people that we fall in love with, or we find a scene that we fall into in music or whatever, it's because there's greater resonance. But that is I think that's why there's such an affinity for this type of music and such a desire to go deep, because it presents itself as a sort of fidelity immediately, and you can't necessarily explain what it is or why. But part of it is because it has practitioners like Ravi who understand the power and the potency of it. But even if none of this is your bag, like music in general, that's what you should be seeking, is not only resonance with the guru of music to take you deeper and deeper towards your own perfect truth in life, but like, how can you put your perfect truth out there with greater clarity based on like how music has taught you to be more resonant? That was an extremely hits blunt sequence there for a minute.
Producer, please insert bong noises.
we do need a soundboard. 96.9, the third eye, making your drive time trippy.
Whatever, man. If you encounter either of us in actual life, we're going to be way more this way if we're sober. So sign yourself up. Yeah.
Yeah. This is pretty toned down for the bar, I would say. We're a lot of fun when there's touch tunes and hot wings involved. You get more than you bargained for 100% of the time.
Yep.
But if you take nothing else away from this episode, I hope that idea of you are a person probably with headphones on on a train, or driving in a car, or like sitting in a room by yourself in a house if you're listening to a podcast, in a very isolating and fragmented world, we should all be seeking resonance with something, like a higher thing, not a thing that seeks to harm. But this teaches you, this attunes you. It doesn't really teach you. It attunes you to the practice of resonance, because it itself is pure and resonant. And as I'm sure you want to get into as we talk about cultural impact, a lot of people latch onto the wrong shit about that, or they make it about themselves, but they still are drawn to it because of its perfect truth as a teacher. So thank you, Ram Dass, for that.
Hell yeah. So let's do my favorite thing. Because you just set me up for the segue. Let me make fun of one or more Beatles. This will be great.
I got a song about an octopus. When the whole time you were talking about the Beatles in the intro and alluding to Beatles go to India, I can only remember it as the Dewey Cox version now. Like that's what I picture in my mind's eye. It's Paul Rudd, Jack Black, Jason Schwartzman, and Justin Long. Just sit here while my guitar weeps slowly. We're from Liverpool.
I think that's fine. Besides, I was reminded how much of a jackass I am anyway for hating the Beatles, because literally I saw someone on the internet this week use the phrase, there are people who hate the Beatles, as a phrase to help you remember that there will always be haters. Like, okay. Okay.
It's levels. Maybe you're... I'm more, I just want to go on the record as saying, like, I was a Beatles militant, anti-Beatles militant for a long time. But now I'm mostly just in the Ron Funches camp. There's that clip of him going around where he says Outkast is more important than the Beatles. And, in 25, 30 years, there will be another insert whatever is more important than Outkast. But time moves on and the sand shifts to other oceans. So
it's partially a defensible stance that's mostly about if you pay too much attention to the Beatles, I think you're not paying enough attention to everything that's not the Beatles, and that's pretty much the root of it. But this is an objectively hilarious moment, okay? Because the Beatles are sort of famously centered as like one of the portal holes through which Ravi entered Western society, but like that point though is sort of pseudo famously on Rubber Soul in 1965 Beatles record. The song Norwegian Wood had an improvised sitar on it.
I was alone,
And they would go on in subsequent records on Revolver, tracks like Love You Too and Tomorrow Never Knows. It had a ton of influence of Indian music. Off Sgt. Pepper's, you got Within You, Without You. So like this persisted, but in Norwegian Wood, there was this kind of improvised sitar, which, you know, sounded cool to the untrained ear in general.
Narrator.
It's kind of hard to say. Like, I don't think they did anything intentionally disrespectful here. However, what they did was sort of effectively disrespectful in that George Harrison heard a sitar. He heard Ravi. Okay. Other people had heard Ravi. He heard Ravi, and he said, that sounds tight. And he's not wrong about that. It does sound tight. That is pretty cool. The Beatles probably could use some weirdness. You should try. However, understand, like we've tried to present to you a little bit, Indian classical music is imbued with like a spiritual connectedness to the mastery of your instrument. So the idea that you would then simply take that instrument and then dick around on your track, call it sitar, and then put it out there, to which other people who had never heard sitar went, that sounds cool, is kind of like low-key disrespectful at this point. And
not to make a Waffle House ass analogy.
Please do.
But it's a bit like if you drive fast down the back roads and you think, well, I could be a race car driver for sure. I can drive. Except the turns at Talladega are like 90 degrees. They're vertical. You drive on a wall. And that's the difference between you and one of the big guys.
Yep.
Nikki Glazer also said something to that effect in the Tom Brady roast race recently. Like, there's so many clowns that think they can go out there and play football because they beat a guy in a foot race once. But like, if you stepped foot onto the field itself, you would blow up into a pink mist compared to a professional football player.
Yep. Oh man. Tom Brady being publicly roasted, Drake being publicly dissed. 2024 is the year of receiving for me.
Nature is healing.
Yes. Oh, we love it. But okay, what Ravi said though, when he heard Norwegian Wood, quote, I couldn't believe it. It sounded so strange. Just imagine some Indian villager trying to play the violin when you know what it should sound like. Oh shit. Like, that's so hard, dude. Like, in one sentence, he is talking about George Harrison, who, again, I like poking fun of the Beatles, but George Harrison was a badass and very good guitar player. So to just be like, yeah, I heard George Harrison playing sitar after he heard me, it was like hearing someone play an instrument when you know that they don't know what it is supposed to sound like. Like, oh, damn. Okay. And I think that little nugget is funny because eventually George Harrison would go on to take sitar lessons from Ravi. But if you let yourself tell the funny story or the overly fuzzy story of it, it's like, oh, the Beatles were inspired by Ravi, and then George Harrison got sitar lessons and started playing sitar. No, it was more like George Harrison fucked up on a sitar in public, and Ravi was like, would you like some lessons so that the next time I hear you play, it sounds like someone who knows how to play the sitar. I love every bit of that, including the fact that George Harrison then took those lessons and had a friendship with Ravi. It's a beautiful vignette of the slightly counterintuitive type of influence he would go on to have.
George Harrison had no problem being humbled publicly. I'll say that.
So in that, I think, again, a thing we can mostly gloss over here primarily because the whole narrative isn't actually that important, but it is, in a literal sense, trivially fun in some particular areas. So kind of speaking around that time, that was around 1965 when, again, that's when Norwegian Wood came out. And so you're talking about the late 60s is when Ravi starts to get in closer relationship with famous Western rock and rollers for the most part. But part of how that accelerated was that Ravi was recording at the same studio as the Byrds and David Crosby. That guy was, So he met the guru. Like, he had the oh shit moment and went fucking crazy about it, telling everyone he could, just like, yo, this stuff is choice. Like, whatever I just heard in the studio is wild.
It reminded me of when Dave Grohl heard Caius for the first time. That's that story Dave Grohl tells all the time of like, I went out and bought 100 copies of Blues for the Red Sun with Nevermind money and gave it to everyone that I ever ran across ever. It's got that vibe to it.
And like around that same time, we'll mention the jazz aspect in a second, and we'll have to take a couple of years step back to do that. But just finishing the quick, like little classic rock thing, like in that same little period of time, there was this is a bit of a double-edged sword, I guess. Like, I think there was some sincere influence from Ravi in Indian classical music, and then just a bunch of aping that started happening too. That was just like, I want my guitar to sound more like a sitar, without understanding anything that went into any of that. But just things that you can hear quickly. The Kinks in 1965 put out a song, See My Friends. And then that same year, the Yardbirds did Heart Full of Soul. And they're basically interpolations of Indian music, and a nice little moment of trying to see what was happening when basically guitarists, blues-based rock guitarists who were experimenting at that point with, amplifiers and electronic guitars and all that, they started trying to find a way to sound more like sitar or otherwise Indian classical music. And it led to a series of really fun and interesting, ridiculous moments. But one of them even just being that Yardbirds track that I mentioned. Like, they hired an actual sitar player to come and record it for them in the studio, and like didn't feel like they could make it work. So Jeff Beck, and that was his first recording with the Yardbirds after he replaced Eric Clapton. So he had the cool task of not only being better than Eric Clapton in this band, but trying to replace an Indian classical sitar player on the track. And that is how they ended up.
And I know, well, if she had me back again, well, I would never make her sad. I got a heart full of soul.
But that, again, that's just like a tenth of a percent of the sort of huge impact it started to have on classic rock that would eventually result in things like Monterey Pop and the Woodstock Festival.
I think a lot of my hesitation with like trying to find the right inroad to talk about this music was thinking immediately of all this hacky shit, just all the Todd, Chads, and Brads of the 60s getting a hold of this, like putting up a Bob Marley poster and all of a sudden you're Ross Trent, thinking about even songs that I like Paint It Black being probably the biggest example, and Brian Jones playing on that, or like The Doors, The End, trying to simulate a raga. Looking back at it, it's all very Gwen Stefani and a Bindi, or like Harajuku Girl era. This ain't it, man. Because you're right, they just like the physical sounds, but didn't try to connect with the spirit of the instrument and the why behind it. And that's so crucial to the practice, to achieving what makes it sound truly good.
Yeah. In a sort of counterpoint or converse to that would be a bit of how jazz was beginning to incorporate and interact with it, and specifically through John Coltrane. I think John Coltrane's interactions with Ravi not only predate George Harrison's and the rest of the guitarists, but it also, I have a curiosity about the earth on which John Coltrane lived further into his life, because what was pretty interesting was he already had expressed a respect for Ravi and a reverence for what he was doing musically, which just on its own is like, if you have John Coltrane's attention, I don't know what sentence comes after that. But in 1961, Coltrane had already started performing with tamburas backing. And then on Africa Brass in 1961, he tries to replicate the tabla, the hand drum, by having two different upright bass players imitate the overall sound of tabla together. They would not necessarily, or they did not go on to collaborate or do anything in particular together. But, before John Coltrane died, two things worth saying. One is, like he said explicitly, I collect the records that Ravi makes and his music moves me, which just any amount of study of John Coltrane will lead you to understand he would not have said that unless he meant it that way. But secondly, like just an anecdote, he named his own son Ravi. Like there was a connection. He met the guru and wanted to be musically connected. And so that's why it interests me to some degree, like some of what we'll kind of close on, the way Ravi's influence turned in the later 60s. I am curious about that turn if John Coltrane had still been with us on this planet at that particular time. Curious if that would have changed or moved anything.
Yeah, don't tempt yourself with the what if Kurt Cobain were still alive exercise that so many people around our age are tempted to do.
So I think
this music and the practice of mindfulness should remind you, like all jokes aside about where that could have gone, the practice of this can remind you, like you cannot change the conditions. Here we are. Do not entertain hypotheticals.
Fair point. Okay, so then the non-hypothetical, which is cool to round this out, and then we'll talk about what to do next if you've connected with something in this episode, which is our last exercise, which is really cool, honestly. So the turn that it kind of took instead. So Ravi's influence, popularity, however you kind of want to describe it, skyrocketed. He played Monterey Pop in 1967, which I have literally studied that as a historical moment in time, so I'm very familiar with all of it. But like, this is the moment where like Jimi Hendrix famously lit his guitar on fire, and like the Who had just been the loudest band to ever exist on record just prior to this festival happening, and it was a huge cultural moment. And
I think we talked about it pretty extensively. It's a crucial part of Otis's story, right?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Man, it's hard to imagine that collection of people.
So a lot of like crazy cultural confluence around this thing.
Yeah. But suffice it to say, you can probably envision what the audience felt like in 1967. Yeah. And just like, I tend to forget this, but like there was a period where like acid was not illegal. So see the thing that your eyes just made, we're in an audio format, but your eyes did that. And then mine did that recently when I read it. And I was like, in my brain, it's never not been illegal. So that sort of changes some of my perspective on a very particular moment in time. But
like a cultural third rail too.
Yes.
The precipice over which the conversation starts to alienate the weekend warriors, somebody that you could very easily pass a joint, you say acid, and you separate the men from the boys, so to speak.
Yep. So he played Monterey Pop along with a lot of other folks. And again, this was kind of famously the place where the audience started cheering after they got done tuning their instruments together. And he said, if you liked that, you're really probably going to like what we're about to play. It's just like, even that little moment starts to bring you to like, oh, this dude must have been of two minds already. Just like, what have I done? What am I doing? And what have I done? But he was well received because shit is sight, man. Like people on acid don't know or don't not know what awesome Indian music sounds like. So like all that was fine. But Ravi's experience of that was interesting. So a quote from him that I think really sets us up to like try to close the book or the chapter on this as best we can with a sense of reverence and like optimism. So he said, in talking about Monterey Pop Festival, quote, "I was shocked to see people dressing so flamboyantly. They were all stoned. To me, it was a new world. I liked Otis Redding. I liked the Mamas and the Papas, Peter, Paul, and Mary, because they were very soothing. Then I saw Jimi Hendrix. I saw how wonderful he was at the guitar, and I was really admiring him. And then he started his antics, making love to the guitar. And then, as if that was not enough, he burned the guitar. That was too much for me." Okay, it's funny and we can laugh, but then I also want you to hear the last part of this quote really specifically. Okay, he said, "That was too much for me. In our culture, we have such respect for musical instruments. They are like part of God." Oh, okay. I bet you didn't have a great time at Monterey Pop Festival. And then he performed at Woodstock and he fucking hated it. He hated it.
Mm-hmm.
And that helped me bring a little bit more out from this album too, because I don't read that as just like regret or dismissal or really anything overly negative other than, oh shit, I forgot that this person was from a totally different planet, it feels like, because of how far our cultures can be separated and how ignorant we can be of one another, what we think about things in general. And so all of a sudden, I had a little bit more clarity to see this guy who's like, I think he probably was really happy and pleased and said so, that he influenced Western music and brought Indian classical music to new places and shared his gift with a lot of people and did a lot of really amazing stuff. And on the other hand, there must be a bitterness to seeing something that you feel is sacred being extracted and exploited, as Americans are so wont to do, right in front of your fucking face, right at the moment where they're yelling back at you, "You're very important to us and all of our musicians are very inspired by you." Like, well, why can't any of you take this seriously for like 30 seconds?
Yeah, I loved reading about that he didn't make demands of his audience in a Miles Davis way, or like he didn't antagonize them, but strongly, gently encouraged them to meet him at that level of reverence. There's that pretty famous interview from 1967 with KRLA where he basically talks about like what you do on your time is your business, but like don't show up slammed to my show. The music is intended to intoxicate you and fill you with those feelings, but
yeah,
it's been handed down from a religious background over literal centuries. Like it traces back to 5000 BC pretty clearly. So don't trivialize it by treating it like a fish show.
So we did our best. We did our best to like really get the heart of this thing across to anyone within the sound of our stupid voices. Like there's, as we always tell you, there's fucking magic in music. Like positioning yourself to receive it is awesome. There's a ton of stuff to discover, and you can do it with a record like this. Seriously, no matter how foreign, literally, it feels to you in this moment, if this is your initial exposure to Ravi, to Indian classical music, to whatever, you don't have to feel bad about the sense that it feels foreign. There's nothing wrong with it. I think even reflecting on like Ravi's words that we just shared, is like he's not criticizing anyone for wanting to hear his music. There's no problem in that sense. Like what he wants you to do is connect with it differently because it's being sent differently. The intended resonance is a sober audience who's focused for hours at a time, not necessarily the people who are there to just like literally feel the vibrations as they're having more of a esoteric internal experience in, you know, amongst themselves all at once. And like, it's a directional thing that someone else wants you to experience. But you can enter into that with a little bit of practice, even if you're not good at it.
Happy birthday, Ravi Shankar. You would have loved Coachella.
The people, they are intense. Why? They do not leave each night. Why? Why is this? So let's close out this way because I love doing this now. This is my favorite way to put an end on this thing. So like, if something just connected with me through any of this, Kyle, what should I start doing next, or what should I look for next? Or what are like any things I can set my brain towards?
You talked about the resonance and the foreignness, like the two feelings I think that you could be left with after these recordings. So if you're seeking the resonance, seek the seekers, I think. The two disciples in their literal music or in their spiritual approach who can probably offer you the most here are John Coltrane or Philip Glass, who we haven't touched on, but
Yeah.
Wonderful, tremendous composer of mostly known for minimalist classical music. Glass's attitude about Ravi Shankar's impact on him like sent me in the direction that I want to go. So I would simply say, on the note of resonance, if you want more tuning forky type stuff, Glass himself said, Ravi Shankar opened the door into a new world of music for me. He told NPR this when he was releasing his memoir, Words Without Music, which I also immediately cued on my tablet. He said that the encounter with Shankar, and they eventually collaborated, unlike Coltrane, a record called Passages. The encounter with Shankar meant the discovery of a wide panorama of musical traditions that until then had been unknown to Glass. India to begin with, but soon his curiosity and desire for exploration took him into Chinese Taoism, its Japanese Shinto variants, the native peoples of Australia and other culture territories that express their worldview through music. The door opened by Shankar led to a wide and diverse road that made Glass take that step that few of us can, and along which we could, for a moment, cease to look at the world from our own criteria, our way of thinking, to contemplate it, at least partially, from other parameters. Glass said, I think one of the reasons that I wrote so much music in my life is because I met a lot of interesting people. As if raising to another scale, that of creativity and the imagination, the well-known saying that each person's head is a world in itself. So it opens the door to worlds within worlds, like seek the dimension of resonance, both in music that you already think you love and in music that seems completely foreign to you, and use that as a vehicle to connect to more people. I work in a global role now with people in like 14 countries, and the easiest way to understand who they are and where they've come from is the vocabulary of music, because it comes naturally. Use music to seek resonance in the world around you and try to grow your world as a result. And on the foreignness note, like straight up legit, if you live in the Western world, study India, the music and the country.
+1.
It's huge. Like the scale
It's
of it is
literally
almost
huge.
incomprehensible. Yeah. It is the 7th largest country by geography. It is the most populous country in the world, overtaking China in the past few years. 1.4 billion people on the subcontinent, but not just a lot of people. Represents 100 languages, more than 700 tribes, and every major religion in the world. People look differently, they speak differently, they think differently. They live on a landmass that has every geography and climate imaginable. Deserts, rainforests, mountains, Everest and the Himalayas. It's all there. And the geography leads to different cultures. And we talked about Hindustani versus Carnatic music, the two types of Indian classical music represented in the 3 ragas on this record. India is huge. And it's the marble on the cat in Men in Black that like contains the whole universe. It is a microcosm of everything. And not only is there the classical music tradition that continues to inform modern styles, but there are all these modern styles, filmy, Bollywood music or music for Indian film makes up 72% of India's music sales. Imagine a world in which Hans Zimmer and Trent Reznor scores were 3/4 of all music sold in America. Like that's an unfathomable thought. And then there's DJ music, to your point about electronic music and dance being part of the resonance. That's a huge part of the culture in a number of different ways. And then pop mixes old and new traditions and Western stuff. There's cool metal bands coming out of India. So there's all sorts of Western influence being like refracted back into there. But There's just so much going on that, like, if you start at Ravi and you want to become a Ravi scholar, just expand it to the diversity of India and like spend a little while being mad about how little you were taught about the Eastern Hemisphere sort of in general in American schools. But like, let the Bill Nye the Science Guy part of you activate, where you want to go learn everything that you possibly can and go to the library and check out encyclopedias and all that sort of stuff.
I love it. The only thing I would add to that at all as another starting point, or maybe I should say one that could translate into live music, especially locally for people in the West, try a weird genre of music that you think is potentially aligned with what is trying to be accomplished here. So drone is a good example, but I just want to be clear. I'm not telling you go to a random noise show. Okay. If you are not experienced in this particular
Ravi
bit,
Shankar, you might like Merzbow.
and maybe you do. Okay. But don't take stabs in the dark from like local bands. I'm saying, especially if this is not your usual cup of tea, hit someone that's known for doing this well. A Sun show. I would include like Godspeed You Black Emperor, even though they're a little bit more on the sort of ambient side. Like, they are literally playing in a semicircle towards each other. Their resonance is involved in what they're doing as well. And so these are a little bit more directly spiritually descended from that idea of resonance meditative music over long periods of time that people are supposed to experience quietly. Trying to go to one of those and beginning to use whatever skills you may have developed through listening to this record and applying it to that setting. Because yes, there are bad drone and noise bands. Shoegaze happened, but you can begin to, for lack of a better term, you'll start to see the guru in certain bands. Like, you'll go, oh no, okay, they know what they're doing. I feel like I may not like it. It may be abrasive, but I see a thing that's happening here and it feels different than other things that I have seen and felt before from other bands. And like, those are the moments that you're looking for.
Man, I love that so much. There's such a satisfying feeling in, well, that wasn't for me, but I learned something tonight, or I really appreciate that exists. You and I were texting feverishly a few weeks ago when I went to Big Ears in Knoxville. Yeah. And that is the spirit of Big Ears. It is the pinnacle for my money of anything that I've ever seen anywhere in the world in terms of just growing yourself and your world. Like, that is the purpose, to have big ears to listen. And if there were ever an artist who embodied the spirit of what that festival is getting after, it would be Ravi Shankar.
Oh, 100%. Thank you, Ravi.
Go to tunedig.com for your chance to win a free vinyl copy of the album we just covered. And follow us on Instagram and Twitter for even more info about the album, including playlists, links to interesting articles and videos, and even some stories that didn't make the episode. Most importantly, though, please support your favorite local record store or concert venue, or buy merch from a band you love. Thanks for listening.